The morning sun cast long shadows across the massive training complex on Zentara Prime. Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of the Galactic Military Academy, his boots making soft sounds on the polished metal floors. Around him, cadets from dozens of different alien species hurried to their classes, their various forms creating a colorful parade of scales, feathers, and crystalline skin. Jake was one of only 12 humans at the Academy this year. Earth had only recently joined the Galactic Federation, and most species still viewed humans with curiosity. They whispered about the strange bipeds who came from a world so dangerous that it was classified as a Class 12 death world. Most civilized planets were Class 3 or 4 at worst. Earth was one of the few Class 12 worlds that had actually produced intelligent life instead of just killing it. "Hey, Jake, wait up." Lisa Grant jogged up behind him, her dark hair bouncing as she caught up. She carried a stack of data tablets under one arm and wore the same gray cadet uniform that all students wore, regardless of species. "Did you hear about today's announcement? They're finally going to let us try the Corvin scenario." Jake raised an eyebrow. Every cadet knew about the Corvin scenario. It was the Academy's most famous simulation, based on a real battle that had happened over 200 years ago. The original Corvin station had held out against enemy forces for 18 months before finally falling. In the century since the Academy had created the simulation, no team had ever managed to last longer than 22 months. "I thought that was only for senior cadets," Jake said as they walked toward the simulation center. "Apparently they're opening it up to second-year students this time," Lisa replied. "Something about wanting fresh perspectives on old problems." They found Ryan Cooper already waiting outside the simulation chamber, studying a technical manual on his tablet. Ryan was the quiet one of their group, but his engineering skills were legendary among the human cadets. He had grown up on one of Earth's mining colonies, where you learned to fix things with whatever you had available, or you died. "You two ready for this?" Ryan asked without looking up from his tablet. "I've been reading about the Corvin setup. The original defenders had some serious firepower, but they played it too safe." "Too safe?" Lisa frowned. "They held out for 18 months against impossible odds." "Yeah, and then they lost," Ryan said simply. "Sometimes playing it safe is the riskiest thing you can do." The simulation chamber doors opened, and Commander Vexstar emerged. The Zirathi officer stood nearly 8 feet tall, his crystalline body reflecting the light in rainbow patterns. His species had evolved on a peaceful world where conflict was rare, and they approached warfare with the same methodical precision they used for everything else. "Cadets Morrison, Grant, and Cooper," Commander Vexstar said, his voice carrying the mechanical tone of the universal translator. "You have been selected to attempt the Corvin defense scenario. This simulation has challenged our finest students for over 100 years. Do not expect to achieve anything beyond the basic learning objectives." Jake nodded respectfully, but inside he felt a familiar stirring. It was the same feeling he had gotten back on Earth when teachers told him something was impossible. Humans had a long history of doing impossible things, usually by refusing to accept that they were impossible in the first place. The 3 humans entered the simulation chamber, and the door sealed behind them with a soft hiss. The room was completely white, except for 3 chairs arranged in a triangle. Each chair had a helmet connected to it by flexible cables. When they put on the helmets, they would be connected directly to the simulation's neural interface. "Remember," Commander Vexstar's voice came through the speakers, "this is a defensive scenario. Your objective is to maintain control of Corvin Station for as long as possible. The simulation will begin with historical conditions matching the original siege." Jake settled into his chair and pulled on the neural interface helmet. The world around him dissolved into white light, then reformed as the bridge of Corvin Station. Through the massive viewports, he could see the dark shape of space dotted with stars. The station was enormous, a cylindrical structure over 10 kilometers long with defensive platforms scattered around it like protective satellites. Lisa appeared beside him, her avatar wearing the uniform of a tactical officer. Ryan materialized at the engineering station, his hands already moving over the controls as he familiarized himself with the systems. Wow, Lisa breathed, looking around at the detailed recreation of the historical station. The original defenders really had some impressive technology. Yeah, but look at how they're using it, Ryan said, pulling up displays showing the station's defensive arrangements. Everything is set up for passive defense. They're planning to sit here and take whatever the enemy throws at them. Jake studied the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. The Thrakari forces were massive, easily 10 times the size of the defending fleet. But they were following a predictable pattern, exactly matching the historical records of the original siege. They're not trying to win quickly, Jake observed. They're settling in for a long siege, just like the history books say they did. That's standard siege doctrine, Lisa replied. Surround the target, cut off supplies, and wait for them to surrender or starve. But that takes months or years, Jake said. What if there was a faster way? Commander Vexstar's voice crackled through their communication system. The scenario is now active. Enemy forces are approaching. You may begin your defense. Around them, the station's crew sprang into action. Shields powered up with a deep humming sound. Weapon systems rotated to track the approaching enemy ships. Supply shuttles began moving between the station and the planet below, establishing the supply lines that would keep the defenders alive during the coming siege. Jake watched it all with growing unease. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had in the historical records. The defenders were making all the same choices, following all the same procedures. But those choices had led to defeat in the end. Lisa, what do you see when you look at their attack pattern? He asked. She studied the enemy formation for a moment. They're following standard siege protocols, establishing a blockade, positioning their heavy ships for bombardment, setting up patrol routes to intercept any supply runs. Right. And how long have they been using those same protocols? According to the historical records, the Thrakari have used this siege strategy for over 300 years, she replied. It's been refined and perfected over countless battles. Perfected, Jake repeated. Or predictable. Ryan looked up from his engineering station. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that on Earth, the most dangerous predators are the ones that don't follow the rules, Jake said. A lion that hunts exactly like every other lion is just another lion. But a lion that hunts differently might catch prey that other lions can't. This isn't hunting, Lisa pointed out. This is military strategy. There are established principles, proven tactics. And those proven tactics led to the original defenders losing after 18 months, Jake countered. Every team that's tried this scenario since then has followed the same basic approach. They've all tried to perfect the defense, to do what the original defenders did, but better. What else would you do? Lisa asked. It's a defensive scenario. The objective is to defend the station. Jake smiled, and his two teammates recognized the expression. It was the same look he got when he was about to suggest something that would either be brilliant or get them all expelled. The objective is to maintain control of the station, he corrected. Nobody ever said we had to do it defensively. Before Lisa or Ryan could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The enemy fleet had completed its approach and was beginning to establish siege positions. In the distance, the first enemy bombardment lit up the darkness of space. The siege of Corvin Station had begun, but Jake Morrison was already planning to end it in a way that would shock the galaxy. The first wave of enemy fire crashed against Corvin Station shields. Blue energy rippled across the protective barriers as the Thrakari fleet settled into their siege positions. Jake watched the tactical display as enemy ships spread out in a wide circle around the station, their movements following patterns that had been used for centuries. Shields holding at 92%, Ryan reported from his engineering station. At this rate of bombardment, we can maintain them for about 6 weeks before we need to start rotating power. Lisa was coordinating the defensive response, directing the station's weapon batteries to return fire at the enemy ships. I'm targeting their forward vessels, trying to force them back and create gaps in their formation, she said. Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on something else entirely. He was studying the enemy fleet's movement patterns, watching how they repositioned their ships, how they rotated their patrols, how they managed their supply lines. Everything was precise, methodical, and completely predictable. They're not really fighting, he said suddenly. What do you mean? Lisa asked, looking up from her targeting display. They're shooting at us. They're performing, Jake corrected. Look at their formation. They could bring their entire fleet to bear on one section of our shields and probably break through in ours. Instead, they're spreading their fire across the entire station, keeping the pressure even. Ryan frowned. Maybe they're trying to wear us down slowly, keep us from focusing our repairs on any one area. Or maybe they're following a script, Jake said. Think about it. This siege technique has worked for them for 300 years. They know exactly how long it takes, exactly what they need to do. They're not adapting to this specific situation because they don't need to. The pattern always works. Lisa turned away from her weapons console to face him. So what are you suggesting? That we break the pattern? I'm suggesting we realize that patterns can be broken, Jake replied. Every cadet who's attempted this scenario has tried to be better defenders. They've upgraded weapons, improved shield efficiency, optimized supply routes. But they've all accepted the basic premise that this is a siege and we're the defenders. Because that's what it is, Lisa said. That's what the historical record shows. That's what the scenario parameters indicate. Jake pulled up a 3-dimensional display of the battle space. The enemy fleet formed a rough sphere around Corvin Station, with the station sitting motionless at the center like a trapped animal. On Earth, when a pack of wolves surrounds a deer, the deer usually dies. But sometimes the deer does something unexpected. Such as? Ryan asked, though he was beginning to understand where Jake's thinking was leading. Such as charging straight at the wolves instead of running away from them. Lisa stared at him. You want us to attack? With what? We have defensive platforms and the station's fixed weapons. They have a fleet of warships. We have more than that, Jake said, his fingers dancing across the tactical display. Ryan, what's the total mass of this station? Ryan consulted his engineering readouts. About 50 million tons, including the defensive platforms. And what's its maximum acceleration? Well, it's not designed for high-speed maneuvers. The engines are just for orbital adjustments and emergency repositioning. But theoretically, Ryan paused, running calculations in his head. Theoretically, if we diverted all power from non-essential systems and overloaded the engines, we might be able to achieve significant velocity. Significant enough to ram an enemy ship? Jake, Lisa interrupted, ramming attacks went out of style centuries ago. Modern warfare is about precision, technology, tactical superiority. Modern warfare is about following rules that both sides agree to follow, Jake countered. But what happens when one side decides to stop following the rules? As if to emphasize his point, another wave of enemy fire struck the station's shields. The bombardment was steady, predictable, designed to wear down the defenders over time rather than overwhelm them quickly. The Thrakari were so confident in their siege doctrine that they weren't even trying to adapt their tactics. "Look at their patrol patterns," Jake said, highlighting the enemy ships on the display. "Every 47 minutes, the same groups of ships move through the same routes. Their supply convoys arrive every 6 hours on a precise schedule. Their command ship maintains position at exactly the same distance from the station. They're being efficient," Lisa said, "conserving fuel, maintaining order, keeping their forces organized." "They're being predictable," Jake corrected. "And predictable enemies are vulnerable enemies." Ryan was studying the technical specifications of the defensive platforms. "You know, these platforms aren't just weapons. They're essentially small spacecraft with engines, shields, and heavy armament. The original designers built them to be repositionable for maximum defensive coverage. But they've never been repositioned," Lisa observed. "Every simulation team has left them in their original defensive positions." "Because that's where they're supposed to be for optimal defense," Jake said. "But what if optimal defense isn't the goal? What if the goal is to win?" Lisa looked confused. "Aren't those the same thing?" "Not necessarily," Jake replied. "Defense means surviving as long as possible. Winning means making the other side lose." Around them, the simulation continued to unfold exactly as it had in the historical records. Enemy ships maintained their siege positions, gradually wearing down the station's defenses. Supply shuttles from the planet below struggled to reach the station through the enemy blockade. The defenders settled in for a long, grinding battle of attrition that they would ultimately lose. But Jake was no longer thinking like a defender. He was thinking like a predator. "Ryan, how long would it take to modify the defensive platforms for maximum mobility? If we stripped out non-essential systems and overcharged their engines?" "Maybe 30 minutes. "And how long to rig the stations?" "Reactor for controlled overload?" Ryan's eyes widened. "You want to turn our own station into a bomb?" "I want to turn it into the biggest kinetic weapon in the system," Jake said. "Something so unexpected that their tactical computers won't know how to respond." Lisa was beginning to understand the scope of what Jake was proposing. "This is insane. You're talking about abandoning every principle of siege warfare. You're talking about tactics that haven't been used in centuries." "I'm talking about tactics that have never been used," Jake corrected. "That's why they'll work." The enemy bombardment continued, each shot precisely calculated to maintain pressure without wasting ammunition. The Thrakari fleet commander was probably reviewing the same tactical manuals that every other siege commander had used for generations. He was expecting the defenders to respond according to established patterns, to make predictable choices, to fight a conventional battle that would end in conventional defeat. He wasn't expecting 3 humans who had grown up on a world where conventional thinking meant death. "Are you seriously suggesting we go through with this?" Lisa asked. Jake looked at his 2 teammates, seeing the mixture of fear and excitement in their eyes. Fear because what he was proposing violated everything they had been taught about proper military conduct. Excitement because they were starting to realize that violating those rules might actually work. "I'm suggesting we ask ourselves what we're really trying to accomplish here," Jake said. "Are we trying to get the highest score on a simulation that's designed to be unwinnable? Or are we trying to actually win?" "But the scenario parameters clearly state that this is a defensive situation," Lisa protested. "The scenario parameters state that we need to maintain control of the station," Jake corrected. "They don't specify how." Ryan was already running calculations on his engineering console. "If we did this, if we actually pulled off a full offensive strike with mobile platforms and a kinetic station attack, the enemy fleet wouldn't know how to respond. Their tactical computers are programmed to handle siege scenarios, not kamikaze runs." "It's not kamikaze if it works," Jake said. "And it'll work because nobody expects it." Above them, the stars wheeled slowly as Corvin Station continued its orbit around the planet below. In the distance, the enemy fleet maintained its siege positions, confident that time was on their side. They had used the same tactics for centuries, and those tactics had never failed them. They were about to discover that there was a first time for everything. Jake Morrison took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. 18 minutes into the simulation, he activated the station-wide communication system. All defensive platforms, this is Station Command. Prepare to abandon. Defensive positions and form up for attack formation. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the station systems. Even the computer-generated crew members seemed to pause in their activities, as if the simulation itself was struggling to process such an unprecedented command. "Jake, are you sure about this?" Lisa asked, her hand hovering over her tactical console. "I'm sure that doing the same thing as everyone else for the past century isn't going to give us a different result," Jake replied. "Ryan, how are those platform modifications coming?" Ryan's fingers flew across his engineering controls. "I've stripped the non-essential systems from all 12 platforms. They're now running on minimum life support and maximum engine power. I've also overcharged their weapon systems, but that's going to reduce their operational time to maybe 30 minutes before they burn out." 30 minutes is all we need," Jake said. "Lisa, I need you to coordinate the attack pattern. Forget everything you know about proper fleet formations." "What do you mean, forget everything?" Lisa asked. "I mean treat this like a bar fight, not a formal dance," Jake said. "Hit hard, hit fast, and hit where they least expect it." Outside the station, the 12 defensive platforms began moving. For over a century of simulation runs, they had remained in their fixed positions, creating overlapping fields of fire to protect the station. Now they were abandoning those positions, their engines glowing bright blue as they accelerated toward the enemy fleet dot in the observation gallery. Commander Vextar watched the tactical display with growing confusion. "What are they doing?" he asked his aide, a young Zirathi officer named Zexlin. "I believe they are attacking, sir," Zexlin replied, his crystalline form flickering with uncertainty. "That is not possible," Commander Vextar said. "The scenario parameters clearly indicate a defensive posture. The platforms are designed for fixed defensive positions." "Yes, sir, but they are definitely moving toward the enemy fleet." Back on the station's bridge, Jake was implementing the most audacious part of his plan. "Ryan, I need you to start the reactor overload sequence." "You want me to blow up our own station?" Ryan asked. "I want you to turn it into the biggest kinetic weapon in the system," Jake corrected. "Can you make it look like a reactor failure while actually creating a controlled explosion?" Ryan grinned. Growing up on Earth's mining colonies had taught him that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was with a really big explosion. "I can rig it to build up power slowly and release it all at once. It'll look like a catastrophic failure, too. They're sensors, but we'll have complete control over the timing and direction." "Perfect. Lisa, I need those platforms to create maximum confusion in their fleet. Don't worry about protecting them. Just make sure they disrupt as many enemy ships as possible." Lisa stared at her tactical display, watching the 12 platforms accelerate toward the massive enemy fleet. Everything she had learned about space combat told her this was suicide. The platforms were outnumbered 50-1, and they were abandoning the protective cover of the station's shields. But she was also starting to understand Jake's logic. The enemy fleet was positioned for a siege, not for a direct assault. Their ships were spread out in a wide defensive formation, designed to maintain a blockade rather than concentrate firepower. They were prepared for a long, methodical battle, not a sudden, desperate attack. "Okay," she said, taking control of the platform formation. "If we're going to do this, We're going to do it right. The platform split into 4 groups of 3, each group targeting a different section of the enemy fleet. But instead of approaching in neat formation, Lisa sent them in completely unpredictable patterns. One group spiraled inward in a tight corkscrew. Another approached in a zigzag pattern that constantly changed direction. The third group spread out wide, then suddenly converged on a single target. The fourth group seemed to retreat, then suddenly reversed course and attacked from behind. The enemy fleet's tactical computers struggled to process what they were seeing. The simulation's artificial intelligence had been programmed to respond to historical battle patterns, but nothing in its vast database matched the chaotic, unpredictable assault that was now bearing down on them. Enemy fleet is attempting to reposition, Lisa reported, but they're having trouble coordinating their response. Their formation is breaking up. That's because they're trying to follow doctrine, Jake said. They're programmed to respond to proper military tactics. But we're not using proper military tactics. The first group of platforms reached the enemy fleet and opened fire with everything they had. Their overcharged weapons tore through enemy shields that weren't positioned to handle such close-range attacks. 3 enemy ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Direct hits on the enemy's forward screen, Lisa reported. Their lead ships are falling back. But Jake wasn't watching the platform attack. He was focused on the main tactical display, where the enemy command ship sat in the center of their formation, still trying to coordinate a response to the unprecedented assault. "Ryan, how's that reactor coming?" "Building up nicely," Ryan replied. "I've got it channeled through the main engine systems. When it goes, it's going to push this entire station forward like a bullet." "And our target?" "The enemy command ship. It's sitting right where it's supposed to be according to their doctrine. Hasn't moved an inch since the battle started." Jake smiled grimly. "That's because they never expected anyone to turn a space station into a guided missile." The second and third groups of platforms struck the enemy fleet from different angles, their unpredictable approach patterns making it impossible for the enemy to establish proper defensive positions. Enemy ships collided with each other as they tried to maneuver in formations that weren't designed for such close-quarters combat. "Enemy casualties are mounting," Lisa reported, "but we're losing platforms too. We're down to 7 operational units." "That's fine," Jake said. "They've done their job. They've broken up the enemy formation and created chaos. Now comes the real surprise." He turned to Ryan. "How long until the reactor reaches critical?" 30 seconds, Ryan replied. "Once I trigger the release, we'll have about 10 seconds before impact with the command ship." "And the explosion?" "It'll take out everything within a 5-kilometer radius, including us." Jake nodded. In the real world, what they were about to do would be suicide. But this was a simulation, and the objective wasn't to survive. The objective was to maintain control of the station. And if the station was destroyed while taking out the enemy command structure, that would technically count as mission accomplished. "All hands, prepare for collision," Jake announced over the station's communication system. Corvin Station began to move. For over 200 years, it had remained in stable orbit around the planet below. Now its massive engines roared to life, pushing 50 million tons of metal and machinery toward the enemy fleet at increasing speed. The enemy command ship's sensors detected the approaching station, but its crew couldn't believe what they were seeing. Space stations didn't attack. They were defensive structures, designed to remain stationary and absorb punishment. The idea that someone would use a station as a weapon was so unprecedented that their tactical computers couldn't even calculate a proper response. 10 seconds to impact, Ryan announced. The enemy fleet was in complete chaos. Some ships were still trying to engage the remaining platforms. Others were attempting to reposition to deal with the approaching station. Many were simply fleeing. their crews unable to cope with tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. 5 seconds, Ryan said. Jake watched the main display as Corvin Station bore down on the enemy command ship like an enormous battering ram. The enemy vessel was trying to move, but it was too large and too slow to avoid the collision. 2 seconds, Ryan announced. The last thing Jake saw before the impact was the look of absolute shock on the enemy commander's face as he realized what was about to happen. Then Corvin Station collided with the command ship in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space. The simulation chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of cooling systems. The explosion that destroyed both Corvin Station and the enemy command ship sent shockwaves through the remaining Thrakari fleet. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for the first 18 minutes of the battle suddenly found themselves without central command and facing an enemy that had just done the impossible. Jake Morrison opened his eyes as the neural interface helmet automatically disconnected. The simulation chamber was completely quiet except for the soft humming of the cooling systems. He looked around at Lisa and Ryan, both of whom were staring at their consoles with expressions of disbelief. "Did we just win?" Lisa asked quietly. "I think we broke it," Ryan said, pointing to his display screen, which was showing error messages in 3 different alien languages. Through the observation window, they could see Commander Vextar and several other alien instructors gathered around. A large tactical display. The Zirithi commander's crystalline form was flickering rapidly, which Jake had learned was a sign of extreme agitation in his species. The door to the simulation chamber hissed open, and Commander Vextar entered with quick, nervous steps. His usually calm demeanor was completely gone, replaced by something that looked very much like panic. "Cadets," he began, then stopped and consulted a data tablet in his hands. "The simulation has ended after 19 minutes and 37 seconds. With a complete enemy fleet rout. This has never happened before. Is that good or bad?" Jake asked. "I do not know," Commander Vextar admitted, his translated voice carrying tones of confusion that transcended species barriers. The scenario parameters indicated a defensive siege situation, the historical precedent established by the original. Siege clearly demonstrates that such rapid victory is not possible within the established tactical framework. Maybe the established tactical framework was the problem, Lisa suggested. Commander Vextar's form flickered even more rapidly. "That is not possible. The Corvin scenario has been tested by thousands of cadets over more than a century. The finest military minds from dozens of species have attempted to improve upon the original defense. The tactical principles involved are well established and proven effective." "Effective at losing," Ryan pointed out. "The original defenders lost. Every simulation team since then has also lost, just a little bit later. That is because the scenario represents an impossible situation," Commander Vextar explained patiently. "The educational value comes from learning to fight effectively, despite inevitable defeat. It teaches cadets to maximize their effectiveness within the constraints of a hopeless tactical situation." Jake stood up from his chair and walked to the observation window. In the gallery beyond, he could see representatives from at least a dozen different species, all of them clustered around display screens and talking in animated voices. Word of what had happened was clearly spreading quickly through the academy. "With respect, sir," Jake said, "I think the real lesson is that constraints only exist if you accept them." "What do you mean by that, Cadet Morrison?" "I mean that every team that tried this scenario before us accepted the premise that it was impossible to win. So they focused on losing as slowly as possible instead of finding a way to actually win." Commander Vextar consulted his data tablet again. "But your tactics violated numerous established principles of space warfare. You abandoned defensive positions, used your own installation as a weapon, and executed attack patterns that have no precedent in military history. That's exactly why they worked, Lisa interjected. The enemy AI was programmed to respond to historical patterns. When we did something that had never been done before, it couldn't adapt. But such tactics would be considered suicidal in actual combat, Commander Vextar protested. Only if they failed, Ryan said. Since they succeeded, I'd call them brilliant. An alarm chimed softly, and Commander Vextar's data tablet began flashing with incoming messages. I am being summoned to an emergency meeting of the Academy Council, he said, his voice carrying notes of bewilderment. This situation requires immediate review by senior officials. After the Zirathi commander left, the three humans found themselves alone in the simulation chamber. Through the observation window, they could see the gallery filling with more and more alien observers, all of them studying the tactical displays and talking in excited voices. I think we might be in trouble, Lisa said. Or we might have just changed everything, Jake replied. Within an hour, news of the 20-minute victory had spread throughout the entire academy. Cadets from dozens of species gathered in the corridors. Outside the simulation center, trying to get a glimpse of the three humans who had accomplished the impossible. Some looked impressed, others seemed confused, and a few appeared genuinely frightened. The humans were escorted to a conference room where they found themselves facing a panel of senior instructors representing the major species of the Galactic Federation. Commander Vextar sat at the center of the group, flanked by a massive insectoid Chitauri general and a floating energy being from the ethereal collective. Cadets, General Ziktar buzzed through his translator. Your performance in the Corvin scenario has raised significant questions about current military doctrine throughout the galaxy. We just tried to win instead of trying not to lose, Jake said simply. But your methods, interjected Commander Ethrol, the ethereal representative, they violate centuries of established tactical theory. You treated military assets as expendable, resources rather than valuable equipment to be preserved. We treated them as tools to accomplish the mission, Ryan corrected. The mission was to maintain control of the station. We accomplished that by destroying the enemy's ability to take it away from us. At the cost of the station itself, General Ziktar pointed out. A cost that was worth paying, Lisa said. Better to destroy the station while winning than to preserve it while losing. The panel of instructors exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication, creating a complex dance of light, sound, and movement that the humans couldn't fully interpret. Your approach to warfare is ... Commander Vextar paused, searching for the right words, fundamentally different from galactic norms. Most civilized species evolved on stable worlds where cooperation and predictable behavior patterns led to success. Your species evolved under conditions that rewarded rapid adaptation and willingness to take extreme risks. Earth is a Class 12 death world, General Ziktar added. Most Federation species consider such planets uninhabitable precisely because they require the kind of thinking you demonstrated today. So what happens now? Jake asked. The instructors exchanged more glances before Commander Vextar responded. Now we must determine whether your success represents a valuable new perspective on military strategy, or a dangerous deviation from proven methods that could lead to unnecessary casualties in real combat. There's only one way to find out, Ryan said. Test our methods against other scenarios. That is precisely what we intend to do, Commander Ethrol said. You will be asked to attempt several other historical scenarios, including some that were previously considered solved. If your unconventional methods prove consistently effective, it may necessitate a complete review of military education throughout the Federation. And if our methods don't work, Lisa asked, then you will have provided valuable data on the limitations of innovative tactics. General Ziktar replied. Either way, your performance today has already guaranteed that the Corvin scenario will never be viewed the same way again. As the meeting concluded, Jake found himself thinking about the implications of what they had accomplished. They hadn't just won a simulation. They had challenged the fundamental assumptions that an entire galaxy had made about warfare itself. Outside the conference room, groups of alien cadets watched them with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The three humans had become celebrities overnight, but Jake wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Lisa asked as they walked back to their dormitory. "I think we did the only thing that made sense," Jake replied. "We looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept that it was impossible." "The question is," Ryan added, "what do we do when the galaxy starts expecting us to make the impossible?" "Look easy?" Jake smiled. "We'll figure it out. That's what humans do." Behind them, the lights of the academy gleamed against the alien stars, and somewhere in the administrative offices, reports were being written that would change the course of galactic military thinking forever. 3 months after the 20-minute revolution, Jake Morrison stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Defense Council on Centrum Prime. The enormous chamber could hold representatives from over 500 different species, and today it was completely full. Beings of every imaginable shape and size filled the curved tiers of seating, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and textures that stretched up toward the domed ceiling. Jake had never imagined he would be speaking to such an important gathering. Neither had Lisa Grant or Ryan Cooper, who stood beside him on the central platform. The three humans wore their dress uniforms, but they still felt out of place among the galaxy's most powerful military leaders. "Cadet Morrison," spoke Chancellor Vorthak, the ancient Centauri leader who presided over the council, "you and your teammates have been summoned here because your actions at the Galactic Military Academy have created significant debate throughout the Federation. Please explain to this assembly how 3 second-year students accomplished what our finest strategic minds considered impossible." Jake took a deep breath and looked out at the sea of alien faces. Some appeared curious, others skeptical, and a few seemed openly hostile. "Honored Chancellor, I think the answer is simpler than most people want to believe. We succeeded because we didn't know we were supposed to fail." A ripple of movement passed through the assembly as translators converted his words into hundreds of different languages. Several representatives began speaking among themselves in voices that ranged from musical tones to mechanical clicks. "Please elaborate," Chancellor Vorthak requested. "Every team that attempted the Corvin scenario before us knew the history," Jake continued. "They knew the original defenders had lost after 18 months. They knew that every simulation team since then had also lost, just a little bit later. So they went into the scenario expecting to lose, and they focused on losing as slowly as possible." Lisa stepped forward. "We approached it differently. We didn't study the history of the scenario. We studied the tactical situation itself. And when we looked at it without preconceptions, we realized that the defenders had enormous advantages that they never used." "Such as?" asked General Morgaine, a massive reptilian being from the Dracorian Empire. "Such as mobility," Ryan answered. "The original defenders treated their station as a fixed position to be protected, but it was actually a mobile weapons platform with enough mass to destroy any ship in the enemy fleet. They just never thought to use it that way, because such tactics violate basic principles of civilized warfare," interrupted Admiral Quextel, a crystalline being whose species had been fighting space battles for over 1,000 years. "Ramming attacks are considered primitive and wasteful. Modern military doctrine emphasizes efficiency, preservation of assets, and minimal casualties. Modern military doctrine emphasizes following rules that both sides agree to follow," Jake replied. "But what happens when you're fighting an enemy that doesn't know about those rules or doesn't care about them?" Are you suggesting that civilized warfare is ineffective? Chancellor Vorthik asked. I'm suggesting that civilized warfare works best when both sides are civilized, Jake said. But if you're fighting for survival against an enemy that wants to destroy you completely, being civilized might get you killed. The assembly erupted in hundreds of different types of discussion. Some species buzzed, others whistled, and a few communicated through complex light patterns. Jake could see that his words had touched a nerve among the galactic community. Order, Chancellor Vorthak commanded, and the chamber gradually quieted. Cadet Morrison, are you implying that the Federation's military forces are inadequately prepared for combat? I'm saying that the Federation's military forces are very well prepared for the kind of combat they expect to face, Jake replied carefully. But they might not be prepared for the kind of combat they don't expect to face. Lisa took over the explanation. Most species in the galaxy evolved on relatively stable worlds where cooperation and predictable behavior patterns led to success. Your military doctrines reflect that background. They emphasize coordination, discipline, following established procedures. And what is wrong with that approach? Asked General Mordain. Nothing, if your enemy uses the same approach, Ryan said. But humans evolved on a world where following established patterns often meant death. Earth taught us that the most dangerous predator is often the one that does something unexpected. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, observed Admiral Quextel. Most Federation species consider such planets uninhabitable. That's because they are uninhabitable unless you're willing to adapt constantly, Jake said. Earth doesn't let you get comfortable. It doesn't let you rely on the same strategies forever. If you stop adapting, you die. Chancellor Vorthik leaned forward in his seat. And you believe this background gives humans an advantage in military thinking? We believe it gives us a different perspective, Lisa said. Not necessarily better, but different enough to see solutions that others might miss. Demonstrate, commanded General Mordain. Ryan stepped forward and activated a holographic display in the center of the platform. This is the Battle of Kepler Station, fought 60 years ago. The Federation fleet was outnumbered 3-1 and lost after a 6-hour engagement. It's considered one of our most heroic defeats. The hologram showed a detailed recreation of the battle, with Federation ships arranged in a defensive formation around a mining station, while enemy forces approached in overwhelming numbers. The Federation commanders followed proper defensive doctrine, Ryan continued. They positioned their ships to create overlapping fields of fire, established supply lines, and prepared for a fighting retreat. They did everything correctly according to established tactical principles. And they were defeated by superior numbers, Admiral Quextel noted. Sometimes there is no solution to overwhelming force. There's always a solution, Jake said. You just have to be willing to look for it in places that seem impossible. He manipulated the holographic display, showing the mining station at the center of the battle. This wasn't just a mining station. It was a mining station in an asteroid field. There were over 300 large asteroids within weapons range, each one containing enough raw materials to build a dozen ships. Asteroids are not weapons, General Mordain pointed out. They are if you push them hard enough in the right direction, Ryan said. The mining station had industrial-grade tractor beams capable of moving asteroids for processing. If the Federation commanders had used those beams to accelerate asteroids toward the enemy fleet, they would have created a massive debris field that would have endangered their own ships. Admiral Quextel interrupted. Only if they stayed in formation, Lisa said. But if they had scattered and used hit-and-run tactics while the asteroids disrupted the enemy formation. You are describing chaos, not warfare, General Mordain said. We're describing adaptation, Jake replied. The Federation fleet was fighting a conventional battle against overwhelming odds. They were trying to win by being better at conventional tactics than their enemies. But sometimes you can't win by being better at the same game. Sometimes you have to change the game entirely. The assembly fell silent as the implications of Jake's words sank in. For centuries, galactic warfare had been governed by established principles that emphasized order, efficiency, and predictable outcomes. The humans were suggesting that those principles might be limitations rather than advantages. "What are you proposing?" Chancellor Vorthak asked finally. "We're proposing that the Federation military establish new training programs that emphasize creative problem-solving and tactical flexibility," Lisa said. "Programs that teach officers to question established doctrine when circumstances require." And we're proposing that you recruit more humans," Ryan added with a slight smile. "Not because we're better warriors, but because we're used to thinking differently about survival. You want us to train our officers to think like Deathworlders," Admiral Quextel said. "We want you to train your officers to think," Jake corrected. "To adapt, to see opportunities that others miss, to win battles that conventional wisdom says are unwinnable." Chancellor Vorthak rose from his seat, his ancient form moving with surprising grace. "This assembly will consider your recommendations. But I must ask, do you truly believe that such unconventional thinking can be taught to species that did not evolve under Deathworld conditions?" Jake looked out at the hundreds of alien faces watching him, then back at the Chancellor. "I believe that survival instincts can be learned by anyone who wants to survive badly enough. The question is whether the galaxy is ready to learn them." The session ended with more questions than answers, but Jake could see that something fundamental had changed. The representatives were no longer dismissing human tactical thinking as primitive or reckless. They were beginning to understand that there might be wisdom in the kind of adaptive thinking that came from growing up on a world that never let you get comfortable. As the three humans left the Grand Assembly Hall, Jake reflected on how much had changed since that morning, 3 months ago, when they had entered a simple training simulation. They had broken more than just a century-old tactical scenario.